Welcome everybody. Thank you for coming. Can everybody hear me? The joy of a mic, right? My name is Lila Darwish. I'm with the Council of Canadians. This is Owen Madden from the Wilderness Committee. I'm really awkward with applause, so it'll just make me blush. I want to start off by acknowledging that we are gathered here on unceded Coast Salish territory, the territories of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish First Nations, and it's an honor to be here. We have a really packed agenda. We have a lot of amazing speakers, and before we get started and going into that, we wanted to start with an opening and a welcome from Linda Williams from the Squamish First Nation. So Linda.
Sam, Sequeda, Linda Williams, Queen Sna, Squamish, Okomeo, Anwinox, and Squalwin. Good evening, friends, chiefs, and elders. My name is Linda Williams. I am of the Squamish people. I reside up in Squamish and come from the village of Giacomish. And I'm very honored to be here tonight to open this meeting and welcome you, each and every one of you, to the Squamish territory. So what I would like to do is start with a prayer, open the meeting with a prayer, and then my family, my lovely niece, lovely daughter, and my nephew will join me in offering a song to start off the evening. Watershed. Oitagahe Hotson, Spaheim, Qui, Chelsea, Files to Steve, Alton, Squala, and Each Noyak, Machuk to Steve. Great Creator, we give thanks for the beautiful day that you've blessed us with. We give thanks to the Sacred Mother Earth, who blesses us with all the beautiful blessings that she does each and every day so that we survive every day. And asking Chelsea for each of us human beings to remember to do what we can to keep Sacred Mother Earth sacred so that she continues to take care of us and we take care of her. Asking for the grandmothers and grandfathers, the sequedals of the Skwomesh, join your grandchildren and all the ones who are working so hard to keep Mother Earth healthy and safe. Asking that you continue to give us strength, knowledge, fill us with your joy and your hope and trust that will always be good things to come for us and our future generations. Can come and tell me, Chelsea, I hope. The song that we would like to open with is a very old song that comes from Sequalia, lady, one of our ancestors. This song belonged to her. And she sang the song every morning when she awoke. And in this song, we thank the great Creator for all that He blesses us with. We thank Him for Grandfather's Son, who gives us life and helps things to grow. And we thank Him for a better day so that we can all live in harmony.
you so much for the welcoming and the opening. Thank you. So, we're going to get started. So for the people who have just come in the room, there is space in the front if people need to find a seat. Yeah, okay, great. As I said, we have a packed agenda. So this is a counter summit. So people are probably aware that there is an actual summit going on with the BC government and the oil and gas industry at the convention center. And they are talking about LNG and how to push it forward as quickly as possible. And they're not necessarily presenting the whole story when it comes to LNG. They're saying it's clean, it's green, it's economical, and that BC, it's a good idea for BC. And so we're having this counter summit to make sure that the voices of everyone do get heard, and that especially the people who are on the front lines of fracking, frack gas pipelines, and LNG get a chance to actually say how it's impacting their communities. So we're really excited that you guys are all here. If you don't know how you feel about fracking and LNG, you might know by the end of the night. Excited for that. Want to add anything?
Yeah, on behalf of the Governance Committee, thank you so much for coming out. We're so proud to have been part of the creation of this event. We've been advocating for environmental progress in BC for 30 years. Rarely has anything as intimidating as the LNG proposal come to us. So we're just asking for an informed conversation on LNG, and many times the voices that need to be heard have been drowned out. One of those voices isn't mine, as Lila has informed me, so I'm going to hand over to her. She's going to introduce our wonderful speakers, and thank you for being here today.
Good evening, everybody. Before I begin, I'd like to ask you a question. How many of you have been up in the oil patch? Hey! How many of you know what fracking is all about? Okay, that's good. So that's going to frame my discussion, so I won't get into too much detail then, but I do have a lot of pictures, and the reason I have a lot of pictures is I think that pictures say a lot more than words do sometimes. And so I don't know how much time I have, so 15 minutes? Okay. I better start moving then. All right. Before I begin, I'd just like to extend greetings on behalf of the treaty chiefs that I speak of, and I have three of them with me. I have Chief Roland Wilson from West Mowbray First Nation, Chief Darlene Hunter from Halfway River First Nation, and Chief Lynette Tekosa from Prophet River First Nation. And the Chief of Soda First Nation is actually coming in tomorrow, and the Chief of Doig River First Nation had other obligations, so I couldn't be here tonight, but on their behalf I extend greetings. And I'd like to also acknowledge that we are in Coast Salish territory, so I'm glad to be here, and I'd like to say that I'm glad to see that there's some distinguished guests in our audience, Chiefs, David, and even Joe. So let's get started. I'm just going to talk a little bit about who we are as the Denezaw, the Cree, and the Dene people from Northeast British Columbia, the challenges that we face, the impacts, and some of the changes that we're seeing up north, and problems and justification, mitigation, and talking about how we can maybe fix all of that or move towards that. So again, these are the 5 nations that I speak on behalf of. I am their spokesperson, I'm the advisor, sometimes I'm the negotiator, sometimes I'm their gopher. So, this is the area that we're talking about, Northeast British Columbia. It's a large area, it takes up almost 1/3 of the province. There are 7 original signatories to Treaty Number 8, and McLeod Lake is the 8th nation that adhered several years ago. We're always being forced to prove that we were on the land, and so Charlie Lake Caves was one of the areas that they radiocarbonated, and they have proved that the Denezaw people have been in that area for over 10,000 years. And so when the government says, prove that you've been here, well, this is our proof. Treaty Number 8, one of 11 number treaties across Canada. It was signed in 1899 in Alberta, and the nations in British Columbia adhered in the 1900s at varying times. It was a treaty, one of the largest treaties, and it was a treaty of peace, sharing, and coexistence. Our elders keep reminding us that it was not a cede and surrender document as this government says that it is. I was going to show you my treaty medallion, and it's my purse that my great-grandfather received when he signed the treaty. And I'll show it to you later if you wish to see it. Unless Chief Roland wants to dig in my purse. Again, there's 11 number treaties across Canada. Treaty number 8 covers three provinces and a little bit of the Northwest Territories. So one of the largest treaties. It's a large area, almost 850,000 square kilometers of area. It's a treaty in which there were promises made to my people that they could continue their way of life, they could continue to fish and hunt and trap as if there was no treaty, for as long as the sun was shining, for as long as the rivers were flowing, and as long as the grass was growing. And you'll see that with all the air emissions, sometimes we don't see the sun. The rivers are being dammed up. The grass is being killed by pesticide use out in the, not just in forestry, but in the oil patch. The people in the land, this is our grocery store, this is our pharmacy, this is our church, this is our school that we're talking about. Our people still practice that bush life. In my nation, of Port Nelson First Nation, there are still 2 settlements where members of my community still live off the land 365 days of the year. And they should be able to continue to do that if they wanted to without being encroached on and interfered with. Our people still exercise in their seasonal rounds. I like to go out there and just see the wilderness. I like to smell it. I like to listen to the sounds out there instead of listening to the helicopters and the trucks and everything that are whizzing by, which is a common occurrence out in my family's territory. We need this area to continue our culture, and the spiritual attachment is there, and we want to continue that also. Cultural rights. This is a definition out of Wikipedia, and I liked it, so I'm using it. It says, cultural rights include a group's ability to preserve its way of life. The objective of these rights is to guarantee that people and the communities have an access to culture and can participate in the culture of their choice. So this is what we're talking about along with our treaty rights. So these are just some members' words who I've asked if I could use it. I borrowed it from another speaker. So basically, the culture has to be maintained for the health of our people, and that how important the land is to our people, for all the things that I said before in the previous slide. The impacts on the land, everything from agriculture, mining, forestry, power generation, and oil and gas. And I need to talk about all these other things, even though we're talking about LNG, because we need to look at the big picture. We just can't be focused on one project alone, like this government is so used to doing. Agriculture takes up a lot of land, especially in the Peace Block and around Fort St. John. And it's basically just agricultural lands. Incidentally, a lot of it is in the Peace Valley that this government wants to flood, which I'll get to shortly. Mining takes up a lot of the eastern flank of the Rocky Mountains. Hope you guys can see that I usually have a pointer, but I don't have a pointer tonight. So you can see that there's a lot up in northeast British Columbia. Currently we have 4 mines that are in operation. This is just a picture of Bull Moose that's around Tumbler Ridge. And there's 14 proposals that are being looked at various stages. And I think there's about 6 that are almost ready to go, right? Chief? Oh. The middle one? I just want to give you guys a little bit of a picture of the boreal forest. Most of Treaty 8 is in the boreal forest. And the boreal forest across Canada, it takes up about 30% of the world's boreal zone. And 80% of the Aboriginal people live in these boreal forests. And something that's really important is that this boreal forest, more of these forests are being cut in the oil and gas industry than in forestry. And it's not included in the annual cut. 8 million cubic meters of timber still cut up in northeast British Columbia. And all the wood out in the oil patch is not considered in mining, it's not considered in the AAC. They're allowed to just burn it out there because they say it's not profitable to bring it to market. Changes to the forest brings changes to our practices. It impairs our way of life. There's a loss of our traditional foods and our medicines, and the unhealthy water from all the hydrocarbons out in the oil patch. Can't drink the water anymore. My parents have to take bottled water when they go out to their traditional camps. And we're losing a lot of our traditional sites, and you'll see why. But I just wanted to show you this picture of a mountain pine beetle in case you didn't know what it looked like. I was shocked when I saw it, and scary, but this has expedited a lot of the clear cutting up in our territory because it has moved up into our territory, as you will see from this picture in 2012. So this is Treaty 8 territory right here. And so 18 million hectares of forest in BC has already been attacked by the mountain pine beetle. And it takes basically one season for them to go in and kill the trees. And most of the times, all they do is they just go in and slash and burn it. Moving on to power generation. Almost 1,800 square kilometers of land has already been flooded by the WAC Bennett Dam and the Peace Canyon Dam. And now they're proposing a Site C dam coming in, and that's going to flood an additional 83 kilometers of the Peace River. That's not going to leave very much left in our territory. This is the WAC Bennett Dam and the reservoir behind it. It's not Williston Lake, it's the Williston Reservoir. This is the valley that this government wants to flood. Beautiful, isn't it? This is a whole other topic on its own, but we won't get into that. So just a quick picture again. This is the Williston Reservoir with the WAC Bennett Dam here. This is the Dinosaur Reservoir with the Peace Canyon Dam. And this is the Clark proposed reservoir with the Site C dam here. I'm calling it the Clark Reservoir, but it's just 7 kilometers from Fort St. John. And so that doesn't leave us very much river in our territory. I know I'm talking about LNG, but this whole area has created a severe interruption into the connectivity between the Yellowstone to Yukon corridor. So it's interfering with the migration of animals, and so it's pretty serious business. In this valley, there are a lot of values that we have brought before the Joint Review Panel. You know, we have some ancestral remains. Some of it we can't go and pinpoint it, but our people, our river people, by our names. This was our main corridor of transportation, so when our people got sick and died, that's where we buried them. And so our ancestors say that there are ancestral remains along that valley and then on the banks. We do know where there is one, and that is Chief Atachi, who is the chief who signed the treaty on behalf of Dory River. And he's buried on the banks of the Peace River. So we're trying to protect this area because of all of these values. You know, how do you tell your grandchildren about a story or a legend that happened in the valley or on the island that is not going to be there anymore? It's going to be flooded. So our elders, we have 2 of them with us from halfway, so it's like to acknowledge you. There they are. And so, you know, they've said that, you know, our descendants going forward need to have the same area that we had as children growing up. It's a spring calving area. They come down in the winter to forage because they can't find anything in the mountains. A lot of important wildlife habitat in that area. Now, we're moving on to oil and gas. All right, first well was drilled in 1942 in the Peace Block, and this Peace Block is around Fort St. John. And so this is a progression over the years to 2012, and you can see how it's really progressed to the tune of almost 29,000 wells, and those are just active wells right now. Government doesn't count all of the wells that are abandoned or dry, and there's impacts with all of those, but they're not considering them in their numbers. So we're thinking that they're close to about 32,000 wells up there that have been drilled. And this was mostly conventional gas. So basically they go through 4 stages, just for those that don't know. You go through exploration, you go through drilling, then you do your completion, and then you produce it. So the oil and gas companies come in, they purchase the 10 years, they start exploration, they start seismic, they start cutting these cut lines that they used to do with cats, and some of them are like 10, 20 years old, and they're still very visible, with a lot of push by our people. They're starting to do avoidance cuts now, where they're zigzagging through the forest. So once they've determined that there's some potential there, then they come in and start building their roads and their leases to make room for the drilling rigs and other equipment. Current drilling is done horizontally to get the shale gas, which is the unconventional gas, because they depleted the other one. And so now they come in and have multiple wells on a pad. They used to only drill in the winter because most of that boreal forest is muskeg, and they couldn't get in there in the summer. But with new technology, they have what's called matting to come and build roads. And some of these pads are like a kilometer by kilometer. This is what a boardwalk looks like out there, made from the muskeg matting. Just a drilling rig. Fracking, typical operation. Tens of thousands of diesel is used. In some cases, thousands of truckloads of water, plus fracking fluids are used. Multiple fracks are used on a pad, and they use special sand that they can't find all the time up there, so they actually bring it in from the States. This is just one of your typical sites. I think we counted 22 great big trucks on this pad. This is your typical fracking example. You know, they bring down the fracking fluids in the sand that creates the fissures, and then the sand holds the cracks open so that they can get the gas flowing. This is just a graphic to show you how sometimes there's a concern that the cement casings could break and leach into the groundwater. Sometimes the fissures are creating greater fissures that are already there, and so hence contaminating the groundwater and surface waters. So they use a lot of water. And the fracking fluids are very, very toxic. In the last couple of years, there's been like 30-something earthquakes that we've never had before up in northeast British Columbia. And why is that? We're questioning it, and they say, oh, it's got nothing to do with fracking. So 3 to 5 million gallons of water per frac, which is about 8 Olympic-sized flows of water. Some lease sites have up to 20 wells on a pad, and they use tens of millions of gallons of water in one site. This is frightening. It might look like underground, and they wonder why it causes earthquakes. And when you have 20 drills on a pad, once a gas field has been completed, course, all the infrastructure comes with it, the pipeline, the compressor stations, the gas plants, and it's horrendous up there. I actually had a movie that I wanted to show you when we toured the Horn River Basin, but I'm obviously not going to have time to do that. But once a pristine area has now become a very fractured industrial landscape. So our concern around water, the oil spills that happen up there, because not only do we have gas, but we also have oil. And when it takes this government over 10 years to clean up a 16-hectare oil spill north of Doig, it's sad. There's huge impact on our wildlife. You know, Chief Rowland's been fighting to keep his caribou in his area, and he's had to go to court to stop mines to try and save a small herd of caribou. Now, why do we need to do that? Doesn't the government see? So this is what my people are seeing when they cut open a moose, you know, and why is that? It's contamination from the hydrocarbons. Soto and West Moberly were forced to do a study, a contaminant study, where they took a small piece of land in the Del Rio area, and 75% of the sites that they visited were contaminated. They exceeded the provincial and the federal standards. So what does that look like in the long term for not just the animals that we eat, but for my people, right? And so we're going to be forced to be able to do our own studies again, because the government just won't do these things. You know, we had to shame them at a conference with the study. It's a whole another presentation in itself. But the moose come in and it creates an artificial mineral lake, because there's a lot of saline and taurine in the hydrocarbons, so it creates a man-made mineral lake. Somebody says, well, there are benefits, right? Well, sure, you know, we do work on the oil patch, and a lot of our people do, but it's our people who are working out there who see what's happening out there, bring it back to the leadership and bring it back to the people and say, hey, this is going on out there. And so there's some good and there's some bad. The population out around our communities sometimes triple in size. You know, there's been camps up there like 2,000 people in a camp. They fly them in, they fly them out. You know, they don't even go into the town to help the economy. There's of course a lot of, along with that come the social problems of drug and alcohol, and there's an increasing rate of cancer amongst our people, and you know, that's another question, why is that? Is it because of the industry that we're surrounded by? So, LNG, right now, for my people, there's a lot of questions. How many projects are going to be approved and go ahead? How many pipelines are going to be associated with all of this? Where is the gas going to come from? Is it going to come from the Montney? Is it going to come from the Horn River? Is it going to come from Alberta? How many transits are going to come in? What are the potential impacts? And so, you know, the landscape is changing across the world. You know, everybody's in this race. And so I'm just wondering, you know, where is BC in that? I hear that they're not even in the race. So, you know, again, is the gas going to come from the up in my neck of the woods, or is it going to come from the Montney, or is it going to come from Alberta? Alberta is really pushing. They're saying that they're going to be very aggressive, trying to get their gas to the coast, because they've already got the infrastructure. So how many projects, how many pipelines, how many LNGs? That's unknown, but we know that they're being proposed. Landscape is changing in the U.S. You know, how many LNG projects will be competing with us? So this government's always justifying, you know, it's economics, it's jobs, you know, we've got to be out there, we'll mitigate, you know, but they don't take into consideration any of the other values. So where is the balance? And we don't see that balance. Justifying projects through mitigation to us is not a model of sustainability. It's just there to promote more industrial development. Conservation, protection, sustainability is not a language that this government knows. Sustainable development, again, is the definition. Everybody knows what sustainable development is about. Low impact while helping to generate income, and the conservation of local ecosystems. It's responsible development that is both ecologically and culturally sensitive. It has to have a minimal impact on the environment and the culture of the host community. So, reconciliation, this government talks the talk, they really like to talk and say, yeah, we're talking with First Nations, but are they really? I always say they talk with forked tongue. I never trust this government. I've been dealing with them for 2 decades, and I've never trusted them, anything. They say one thing and do another. Classic example, when they were up in my nation. Everybody's there the day before saying, oh, everything's hunky-dory. But yet they were passing an order in council to go in and lift the EA reviews for gas plants, and ski slopes, etc. So reconciliation has to include what we want. It has to balance everybody's values. We're open to that. And it must include a regional strategic environmental assessment. This is something that we are adamant about. It's a way to look at the cumulative effects and impacts of all of this development that's happening in our territory. And it'll help us define a forum how we can sit down and talk about policy issues. And it'll streamline project-based environmental assessments and regulatory-based decision-making processes. We think that this type of an assessment will help determine if a project really is in the public interest. And it'll help find ways to optimize benefits and minimize impacts. And we can understand and encourage the balancing of values to ensure that the best outcome is there economically and environmentally for everybody. The JRP on the Site C said it. You need to do an environmental assessment. There is already so much happening up there, even without Site C, even without LNG. And LNG, they're proposing upwards of, I think what's the last number, 10,000 wells?
David Hughes figures will be 50,000 wells.
Well, it's changing all the time, so huge. So they have to come and talk to us, or else there's not going to be any LNG, because the gas is coming from our territory. We're the breadbasket for this province. We're the cash register for this province, and that's why the chiefs are down here, and I'm going to talk to this government. So how can we understand the potential of impacts for our communities when there are so many unanswered questions right now? All we hear is all these proposals. We need answers for informed decision making. Like I said, don't trust this government. They're always changing the rules. Now they're going to allow industrial development in the parks. Crunching. Our elders are very concerned. Our elders have always told us to be nice, listen, be respectful. But you know what? Our elders are now telling us it's time to stand up for this government and do something. Yeah. I like to use this slide because the late Max Dersley said it, and it just resonates with me because he says, I'm hurt. My heart is crying because my great-grandchildren are not going to have the water to drink anymore. They spoiled our land and our water, and he's telling our people, get together, start working together, and be strong and fight this government. So what will be left? It seems funny. It's a funny cartoon, but that's what's happening to us. With all of the resource development around our territories, we have nothing left. And so that's it. So.
So next up we have Shannon McPhail. So we're going to go from the northeast to the northwest of BC. And Shannon is the executive director of the Skeena Watershed Conservation Coalition. She's been living up in Hazelton and in the Skeena Watershed, where her family has lived for 6 generations. So welcome, Shannon.
Thanks for being here, guys. And pardon my redneckishness. I'm the daughter of a big game outfitter and a rodeo stock contractor. I worked for a pipeline construction company as a welder. My husband is currently a welder in the oil sands, and we are opposed to LNG as it's currently proposed. Before I get into my presentation, there are some things that are happening in communities that I really need to acknowledge. So I've been struggling with this for a few days, and I found out that the Squamish First Nation is also struggling with this, but we lost a community member. And in a small community, it means an awful lot. So Linda Williamson, could you please come up and could we have a moment of silence? Squamish recently lost 4 community members, some of which were elders. I live in a community of 1,000 people. And we lost Chris Johnson, who was a Gitsan man. And he greeted me in my office every single day with a big smile. So I'd just like to take a moment of silence for those who are suffering in their communities. Thanks, Linda. And thanks, that helps me get collected too. So I'm going to try to get through this quick. 10 concerns in 10 minutes around LNG in northwestern BC. So the first is LNG pipelines bring fracking. What we hear from these companies when they come into our communities is half-truths. It's not that they're lying, it's simply that they're not giving us the whole truth. We hear, we will never frack you. We are not a fracking company. We are simply a gas transmission company. We build pipelines and that's it. And that is the absolute truth. The other truth is that pipelines provide the infrastructure to encourage fracking to your area. The reason we don't have fracking there right now is because there is no pipeline to export it or get it anywhere. Once a pipeline comes through, you open up for fracking. You can see on the map on the top right, the Bowser-Sustit. I live in the Bowser Basin, huge coal deposit. Shell tried to drill in there for coal bed methane in the sacred headwaters, and some of you might have heard that they voluntarily left, chased out by the Teltan and all the downstream communities, one of the largest oil companies on the planet. And when we stand up as a region, when we stand up as a region, industry is actually the small player at the table. Another common myth, this is not oil. This isn't Enbridge. I actually think it's bigger than Enbridge. There are 12 to 15 LNG pipelines proposed. This is unprecedented. This isn't just the first time LNG is being proposed in the Skeena watershed. This is the first time it's being proposed in Canada. Gas pipelines become oil pipelines all the time. This is TransCanada's plan for their line east. The blue is existing gas pipeline that they want to convert to oil. The pipeline spill in the Red Deer a couple of years ago was a gas pipeline that was converted to oil. So it's not an uncommon practice. They need to change compressor stations. Community impacts, Liz touched on quite a few of these. The one that I would like to point out the most, these companies are preying on the poverty of First Nations. Boom and bust economies come in, logging industry, mining, all these different industries that we use. Northwestern BC, we're a resource extraction region. We're good at it. It's what we do. We've done it for a long time. But what we've seen happen with the boom and bust schedule is people become dependent on large industry. And then large industry goes bust. And then the next one comes in. And because we've become more and more dependent on industry and less on ourselves, we have no choice in the end but to accept more industry. And that's what people are saying. This industry is coming through, your economy is depressed, you need this. And I would argue that that's exactly why we don't need this. We need to create better solutions. The other one, because I'm a little hooligan, there's a 1,000-man camp proposed in the Kispiox Valley. That's where I was born and raised. 200 people live there. 1,000 men over 4 years will produce 1.46 million pounds of poop. What do you do with 1.46 million pounds of poop? We also have an existing economy, and this is something that doesn't get talked about very much. Skeena wild salmon contribute $110 million to the local economy each and every year, guide outfitting another $28 million. And there are several other economies that are dependent on a clean and intact watershed. Just between guide outfitting and wild salmon, every 7 years, that is $1 billion in our pocket, and that's what is being put at risk. Tourism in northern BC alone is a $1 billion economy, and the #1 reason cited when they polled tourists was they come for the nature, the wildlife, and the scenery. We're just finding out that water use is now unregulated if they're not withdrawing water from a park in a designated protected area, or if the stream is less than 5 meters. We have never seen this before. We've never seen the oil and gas industry having a free-for-all to our fresh water in British Columbia. They are drilling on the Kispiox River right now, drawing about 5,000 liters per day. That's one company, that's one drill site, with 12 to 15 pipelines proposed. I'm a little bit worried about how much water they're going to take out cumulatively. And we don't know, and we won't know, because it's not being regulated. They do not have to get a permit to suck water from our rivers. I should also point out they're doing this while the steelhead are spawning and the salmon are migrating. Liz touched on this. They're making things that were previously illegal, legal. They've made change to numerous acts, right? She talked about pipelines and parks. The Water Act has now changed so they can have unregulated use of water. The Agricultural Land Reserve, the Fisheries Act, all these things are being systematically downgraded for industry's interests and not our own. And we're the people who live here. The terminal location, so you got fracking, then you've got pipelines, and the pipelines have to go to these terminals where they have to cool the gas, liquefy it, to minus 160 degrees Celsius, and that's why they want a dam. That's why they want to build the Site C dam, an 800 megawatt dam, I think it is. 900, 800. It will barely be enough to power a single LNG terminal. That's how much power these guys need. The Skeena estuary is important. I'm going to go back to this photo here. The island you see with the bank out in front, that's Lilu Island. 100% of that island will be consumed by Petronas's LNG terminal. The island beside it, Ridley Island, on the end, will be 100% consumed by BG. These things are oil sands scale infrastructure. These are massive. Every single salmon and steelhead from every single river all go to the Skeena estuary, not once but twice. That is where they acclimatize to the salt water, the currents, the new predators. It's where they try to find food, and they seek out these little refuges, these banks of eelgrass, and they stay in there until they can adjust to the salt water, until they make the big migration out in the ocean. They go there twice, and that is where these terminals are being proposed. LNG in the Skeena estuary has the potential to drastically alter salmon and steelhead in our watershed, something that our economy in the north is based on. That's Lilu Island and Flora Bank in the foreground, and this is what LNG terminals look like. Largest dredging event in Canadian history. This is a graphic that a Trans-Canada rep gave us, and then he drew 4 islands down in front and said, we're going to dredge this over here so we can get our tankers in to turn around, some of the biggest tankers in the world. These are the largest pipelines in Canada. Coming to some of the largest terminals in the world, dredging some of the largest dredging events in Canadian history. And why is that a problem? Well, 7 million cubic meters of the ocean floor dredged up to dig these big pits, basically for these big turnaround points for tankers. That's 2,800 Olympic-sized swimming pools. Oil, or transport cars, rail cars, takes 22 of them to fill up one Olympic-sized swimming pool. That's how much sludge they're going to take off the ocean floor, which is toxic. And it's toxic because a previous industry, Skeena Cellulose, pumped all their toxins out into the estuary. And it's covering the estuary floor. You dredge that up, it releases those toxins to where every single one of our salmon and steelhead go, twice. Canadian Environmental Assessment Agency just reviewed the environmental impact statement for one of these terminals and came back with a 5-page document in bullet point form of all the gaps in information that the company missed, and basically asked, what the hell are you guys doing? You did not take this seriously. You didn't assess anything. I mean, that was my take on it. It's not exactly how they worded it. So far, where I live, this industry is not off to a good start. They're dividing our communities. They're pitting chief against chief. And you know what? When a chief decides to work with an LNG company, they are not selling out their nation. They are not doing it because they are money-grubbing, greedy people. They are doing it because they are trying to build an economic future. And they are trying to do this for the betterment of their community. So I will not take on chiefs who are working with industry. They're doing so from a good place, out of love for their community, not out of greed or hatred. But obviously it's causing division. And there have been some violent activities that have resulted in this. A guy's car got keyed up because he's working with the industry, and it's just not right. The dude with the gun, that's my dad. He had a chat with TransCanada, who's drilling just above the wilderness lodge he's got up there. Oh, God. And he informed them months ago, he said, look, you're on your permit, it says there's no wildlife habitat, no ungulate winter range. Well, that is moose habitat, and the moose are calving right at the same time that you want to drill. And they said, that's not moose habitat. I know moose habitat, and that's not habitat. And Dad said, let's go for a ride. So he took him up there, and he pointed out all the moose poop, all the places where they chew on the willows and gnaw on the trees, and all the places where they bed down. And the helicopter comes into land, 2 moose get spooked up and run into the bush, and the guys threw their hands up, and they said, okay, it's moose heaven. We'll get it on the next one. And Dad said, no. Give them a chance to calve. I'm just asking you, at minimum, just delay. So we went to Flinroe, Forest Lands and Natural Resource Operations, where the Ministry of Environment is housed. And we said, can they do this? This was their response. Basically, no, they can't. And they shouldn't. Somebody screwed up here. But the Oil and Gas Commission, who's the regulator, who's funded by industry by selling permits and rights and tenure, for companies to drill, sort of like the fox watching the hen house, said they are authorized and legal, and the drilling will continue. Not off to a good start in the community. There's lots of other issues. I think other people are going to touch on them, so I'm just going to bring up one more. This is the current and proposed development map for northwestern BC. Before LNG and Enbridge were ever presented, we were overwhelmed with development. Like I said earlier, we are a resource extraction region. That's what we do. There was over $10 billion of industry going forward. The Red Chris Mine, $1 billion. Northwest Transmission Line, $1 billion. The Kitimat Modernization Project, $3.3 billion, which was the single largest project happening in BC. The mining and exploration industry, the 3 run-of-river hydro projects, each around $1 billion just in construction. And that's just the stuff that I know that's going forward. There are hundreds of proposals. When you were a First Nation and you were looking at this stuff and you were just trying to get through the Tahltan First Nation, 180 proposals in a few months. The government offices can't handle it. How can a single First Nation handle it? We were overwhelmed with development before LNG was presented, and now we're dealing with 12 to 15 gas pipelines and oil pipelines. And it's getting out of hand. And the last point I'm going to leave you with, in this image, this is August Brown. This was at the Sacred Headwater celebration, and he said he gave some pretty good words of advice. And he said, nobody stands a chance against people when they stand united. And we will.
Great. So Northwest BC, we just did pipelines, LNG, and now we're going to talk a little bit closer to home, Howe Sound and Squamish, where there is an LNG plant being proposed called the Wood Fiber LNG. And Joyce Williams, who is from the Squamish First Nation and is a member of Squamish Action and also another community group called My Sea to Sky, is going to speak a little bit more about that.
Hot Squalegwan, Joyce Queen Sna, Snatchintal Wewe Kamoko Mail, Skwomesh of Onrenox and Squalwin. Good evening, everybody. My name is Joyce. I come from the village of Wewicum, which is in the Skwomesh territory. So our Skwomesh territory ranges all the way from northwest Vancouver, all the way up towards Pemberton. So we are very much involved in a lot of the proposed developments that are coming upon us. So I'd just like to quickly say thank you to all the organizers and for all you wonderful people that have come here to stand together and work together. And for the moment of silence, we did, a lot of our people weren't able to make it tonight due to funeral services. So thank you to my relatives that were able to come and stand with us. So LNG, so I'll just give you guys a quick heads up. So I'm in my Sea to Sky and Skwomesh action that I'm involved in. I'm usually kind of in the backgrounds, organizing things, so I'm not usually one of the speakers, but it's in my teachings not to say no. So I also work in the schools. I just finished working with a bunch of grade 8s in kindergarten, so I figure if I can catch their attention, you guys should be a breeze, right? So starting with LNG, propose hearing about it, I was quite terrified to hear about it. Actually, we are Swayat, the ancestral place name of where the wood fiber LNG is as our people, my Squamish First Nations ancestry have been there for many years. That specific spot was used in the valley for deer hunting, up closer in the valley also for mountain goat hunting and harvesting. There's also a very traditional place of our puberty rites, also for when you're doing, preparing for spiritual work. So it was actually in our traditional times, a very spiritual place for us, and so very close to our people in the Squamish area. So we've been having a few battles for a long time now in our territory, starting with some of the locations and the developments of the LNG. So what's called Squamish is where they're proposing to put the second pipeline. I'm very fortunate to have in my family my uncle, who is our environmental advisor. So he's a mentor of mine, and at 1991, I think I was 10 years old, he had us out there in the front lines of the picket signs protecting this space, which is the estuary. So we've already been battling for this space that's in our territory. So all of that fighting that we've done when I was younger, now I'm a mother, all that fighting will have been for what? Right, so we've already been battling. Also the house sound that was mentioned. As I mentioned, we're a canoe traveling people. We travel by canoe, coming from our different territories. We're nomadic. So coming from our village in Chamalchelson, which is in North Vancouver, coming up to our villages in Waywicombe, Squamish, Squamish, waterway was very important to us, and that's something that's just starting to come back into our communities. We're starting to have our youth out there racing in the canoes, some of our family here, going on tribal journeys this year up to Bella Bella. So bringing these practices and these old traditions and customs back to our starting with our young ones. I'm going to take my daughter, she's 3 years old, and I'd hate to see for something like that be discouraged from all these big tankers that are sitting in our house sound or up the coast and the inlet for our traditional practices that are just starting to come back into our community. So it's a bit of a scary time for us. We've also, like a few people mentioned, I've heard, it's not our only struggle we've got going on in our community. We've got a number of things going on, right? We've got our proposed aggregate line. We've got the LNG, we've got the waste incineration, we've got clear-cut logging, we've got 2 different kind of residential developments going on. It's a lot, and we're feeling a little bit bombarded right now with all these different developments, and we're just starting to replenish all of our wildlife, all of our traditions and customs back. Just starting to get all these things back, and they're bombarding us with all these different proposed developments. So feeling a little bit overwhelmed, but it gives me hope to see all these faces in here and all these wonderful people that I've met at different events, different trainings, different documentaries. So it gives me a little bit of hope to know that we'll all stand together in this fight and work together to help protect as my Cheshire said, our sacred Mother Earth, especially for our future generations. Anything I can do to help, I'm here. Like I said, I'm not usually a speaker, so I'll probably keep it brief. Those are just some of the things that we've got going in our community, which is certainly a lot. And I'd like to thank all of my fellow Marcy Sky and Skwomesh option that are here to support us, and all of you other people that are here. Like I said, time for action, time to collaborate and start working together to protect what's rightfully ours, right, for our kids.
She did amazing, right? Yes. Next up, we have Tracey Saxby, who is from Squamish and is also going to be talking about wood fiber and what has been happening in terms of mobilization in the community.
So I am Australian and I am Canadian, and fracking threatens both of my countries. Before I moved here in 2001, as an Australian, I actually thought Canada was a pretty environmentally aware country. And for that, I'd actually like to blame David Suzuki. I asked all of my friends back home, and I'm like, what do you think of Canada? And they're like, Canada's green, right? It's environmentally aware. And I moved here and I realized that it's really not. But you have David Suzuki. And he is so admired in Australia and such a force and such a voice of reason. And so because of that, we ended up having this misplaced belief that Canada is environmentally aware. So just as a little background, I came to Squamish on vacation in 2001. And I never left. And I'm going to read out a little bit from these t-shirts that we designed from My Sea to Sky. Let's just see, here it says, I fell in love with the ocean, the rivers, the temperate rainforests, and the mountains. The lifestyle is what attracted to me, Squamish, and the people is what made me stay. I could live anywhere, and yet I choose to live in Squamish. Every morning when I wake up, I look at the chief, and every day I know that I am incredibly lucky to be able to call Squamish my home. So Squamish and the House Sound are some of the most spectacular places that I've ever seen. This really is my heart's home, and when I first came here, I just kept on getting drawn back to Squamish. It is such a special place, and it is such an exciting time to be there. It's a community in transition. It's transitioning from the old ways, the extraction and resource-based industries, to a new economy that has a broader economic base and a more diverse economic base and a more resilient economic base. We're looking at knowledge-based industries. We have 2 universities in town. We are looking at the rec tech industry, like Pink Bike has just announced that they're going to be moving into town. We have a hub that has started that is all about trying to foster innovative entrepreneurs. All of these things make sense. LNG does not. So when I first heard about the proposed wood fibre LNG project, I actually thought, like, my first reaction was, oh, you know, that could actually be a good use for the old wood fibre site. It's a contaminated site, it's zoned industrial, there's a lot of toxic waste left over there, and the proponents say they're going to clean all that up. So it's like, oh, you know, like on the surface, you know, the cries of jobs and taxes, it all sounds good. But as soon as you start digging below that surface, it's scary, and it doesn't make any sense. So wood fibre LNG started having their first open houses in February this year. And I went to one of the first sessions, and I asked some questions, and I didn't really get any answers. Hundreds of other concerned people also went to these sessions and asked their questions, and they didn't get any answers either. So we're there asking questions, not getting answers, and it just seems to be like the industry is asking us to trust them without actually providing any of these answers, and that just doesn't work. So this is when the seeds of My Sea to Sky were born. I started meeting some other amazing people that were as concerned as I was, and we started talking, and we started meeting. And one of the first things that I did was I actually hosted a Connect event, which is organised through Lead Now. And about 80 people came out, and we knew straight away that the wood fibre LNG was going to be one of the big issues. So we organised for that, and we separated everybody out to talk in the different groups. And we started talking and we started organising. And it was really quite amazing. I then wrote an opinion piece based on all of the open sessions that I went to that were organised for this wood fibre project, the LNG project in Squamish. And it was essentially asking all of the questions that I had asked and the questions that everybody else had asked and hadn't had answers to. And through that, more and more people started contacting me, and more people started, explaining how concerned they were as well. There were some people that decided that they wanted to start organising events and information sessions in town, so we connected with them. There were some people that created a neighbourhood group, and they wanted to start writing letters to council and the government, and so we connected with them. And so it was really all of these people that came together, and this is how My Sea to Sky has been formed. And we have reached out to communities from Whistler to West Vancouver. We've reached out to people and organisations, and we've found some incredible mentors and so much support, and it's been incredible. So one of the first goals of My Sea to Sky is to educate the community about what the issues are with this proposed wood fibre LNG project. The second goal is to reach out, as I was saying, to all of these other organisations, all of these other communities that are going to be impacted by this proposed project. It's going to have very far-reaching impacts from West Vancouver all through the Sound and as far as Whistler, even when you start talking air quality or when you start to talk about the tankers that are going to be transiting through the Sound. All of these regions are going to be impacted, so you need to be as concerned about this as we are. And then that doesn't even mention the upstream impacts and what is happening in the northern communities, right, with fracking. And that just doesn't make sense. It also doesn't make any sense when you start looking at it from a global perspective and what this means for climate change. When you have an industry, a boom and bust industry, and their only goal is to make as much money as possible, they're going to be pumping the stuff out, and it doesn't make sense from a climate perspective either. So we've really joined together and we've organised, and it's been incredible. We've had our first event, we've set up a website, we've set up a Facebook page, we've designed t-shirts. If any of you want a t-shirt, we are going to have them outside afterwards. They're $25 each. And that will help us to pay for some of these things. It will help us to pay for the information sessions and all of that kind of stuff as well. And last week we organised our very first protest, and that was incredible. The Sea to Sky gondola had its opening on Friday, and if you haven't been up there, I highly recommend going because it is spectacular. Seriously, I want to live on their deck and drink beer. And I don't even drink beer, that's why they kicked me out of Australia. So the protest itself was incredible. We had about 120 people come out, and this is on a busy work day. So people took time off work to stand on the side of the highway and to let our politicians who were going to be at this event know that we do not support this wood fibre LNG project. We do not support fracking. And to be honest, I really think that this project, the fact that Christy Clark is personally pushing this project is a huge tactical error. Because what that has done is that it has brought these voices from the north that have been trying to get their information and their message out there, and it has made it a local issue. And I really hope that we can continue to connect and that we can continue to share your voices and share the stories of what is happening out there, and to say, this is happening here, and it's happening in our backyard right now, and we will do whatever it takes to stop this.
We have about 3 or 4 speakers left, and then we're going to actually ask the speakers a question of what can we do to actually support their struggles. So hopefully you guys can stay till the end of that. I would like to bring up Grand Chief Stewart Phillip, who's the president of the Union of BC Indian Chiefs.
You want to go last.
You want to go last now? I'm going to close it. Okay, then you guys have to stay to the end. Okay, so we're going to do Damien. Yeah. So Damien is a journalist and a documentary filmmaker. He is the co-founder and publisher of The Common Sense Canadian, and is co-producing and co-directing an amazing documentary that I think a lot of folks want to see called Fractured Land.
Just as I get set up here, just gonna switch a few things here. I'd like to first of all acknowledge my presence and what a privilege it is to be on unceded Coast Salish territory here tonight in a room full of such amazing people. This is a big day today. I think we may look back 5-10 years from now and see this as a turning point in this issue of this confluence of issues, fracking and LNG and Site C Dam and all these things. We've had so much attention on the Enbridge pipeline issue, justifiably so, but as that enters another phase, you're hoping that it's a positive one for where a lot of people in this room would like to see that go. I hope that with all the attention today on the media, I was at the conference today filming, and I'm going to show you a little bit of that because I'd like you to see what the other folks are saying here today about this issue. But it's just terrific to see such a packed room full of such amazing people, and I hope that with this collective energy we'll move forward in a positive direction and start giving this set of issues the kind of attention that they deserve. Because in terms of climate and water impacts, they're 10, 15, 20 times bigger than the Enbridge pipeline, even bigger than the Alberta oil sands, tar sands, whatever you choose to call it. That sounds maybe far-fetched, but hopefully over the next 10 minutes here, you'll come to see, if you don't already realize that, you'll come to see why that is. I'd like to start off by just playing a clip here. I just threw this together as quickly as I could today because I thought it was really important that you hear what sometimes these $750 conferences are, there's a closed door kind of attitude at them, and it's people in the same circle speaking to themselves, and they often speak in a very different way than they would publicly, and the kind of messaging that we hear in election cycles and things is kind of on steroids. And one of the things that has just really struck me today is the total lack of science, of data, of real fundamental economic wisdom. There's just an incredible sort of Rich Coleman, the minister of hot air, as I've come to call him. There's a kind of revival preacher element here. It's kind of like being at a seance or something, and it's, if we believe hard enough in these things, then they'll come to bear. So what I'm going to try to offer here, just in the 10 minutes I have, is a sort of fact-based counterpoint, drawing on the top of geoscientists and biologists and climate scientists. And so this first clip, I just juxtaposed here. I was at Cornell University. I want to acknowledge my filmmaking partner here, Fiona Rare, who's up front here getting some footage here tonight. My life partner, my lovely fiance Amelia, is here as well. And the subject of our film and our brother Caleb is here in the audience as well. I'm going to play a clip of that in a moment. So you can see what the on-the-ground implications look like for the people who are, and maybe just add a little visual element to what Chief Logan showed us there earlier about what's going to happen upstream from this. But this, I'm just going to juxtapose this with, we spoke to arguably the top climate scientist on the issue of shale gas and the implications of particularly escaped or fugitive methane emissions, and how that completely skews all these models of what can be fairly characterized as clean, or not fairly characterized as clean LNG, and the statement that Premier Clark made. If we could just bring the lights down, is that possible? Just up here? Is there any...
It's over there in the corner.
Oh, there we go. Coming up? Okay, here we go.
LNG is one of the fastest growing sources of energy in the world. It's also a chance for us to help the world transition to the cleanest fossil fuel on the planet.
Please join us in welcoming to the stage Premier of British Columbia, the Honourable Christy Clark.
We have so much work to do together, so much ahead of us, with a generational opportunity to build an LNG industry for not just our province, but for our country. And this really is, for us, all about building a nation, creating jobs, rolling up our sleeves to take advantage of this generational opportunity to build a prosperous future for every Canadian. But it is more than just about Canada. This is about our opportunity to make the biggest change and the biggest contribution we ever have as a province to reducing greenhouse gas emissions around the globe. By powering up the economies of Asia and helping them move to the cleanest fossil fuel on the planet, move away from dirtier fuels, cleaning up the air there and cleaning up the air here as well.
The natural gas industry and many politicians like to promote shale gas and natural gas generally as a bridge fuel that allows society to continue to use fossil fuels and yet puts out less carbon dioxide than, say, coal or oil. It's true that less carbon dioxide is emitted, but shale gas in particular, natural gas in general, emit huge quantities of methane. And methane is such a powerful greenhouse gas that when you look at the cumulative impact of these greenhouse gas emissions, natural gas, and particularly shale gas, is the worst of the fossil fuels. Premier has their facts around. Our research suggests that at least 3.5% of the gas that's developed in the shale gas formations emitted to the atmosphere is methane, possibly up to 8% or more. There's increasing science saying that at least 5-6% of shale gas is going off. When you look at it, say it's 86 times worse than carbon dioxide in terms of its greenhouse gas emissions. It's disastrous to use this as a fuel. And using an LNG is probably the worst way to use it as well, because it takes a tremendous amount of energy to liquefy the gas to LNG. So a lot further methane emissions associated with transporting and storing the fuel.
So there you have two very different visions. Now this is a man whose research is the International Panel on Climate Change uses as gospel. They've just come out with a new paper at Cornell just reaffirming this research. And you just heard it from him. He characterized it, I think correctly, not as clean, but as the single worst commercially available fossil fuel ever invented. That's what I'm going to call it. And I'm going to back that up here in a second. But the other thing I'd like to talk about here and show you is the disconnect that we have between, and other speakers have spoken to this, where this fuel source is going to come from. LNG is talked about and viewed in a silo as though we don't know where it came from. The fact that we're going to have 5 times as much fracking as we've had up until just recently in order to supply this industry is completely left out of the conversation. And so is the cultural and spiritual and lifestyle impacts on the ground, the segmentation of the landscape, the toxins, the effect on hunting, traditional fishing and hunting practices, and all these sorts of things that Indigenous peoples in these territories who have already paid a very heavy price to fuel this province and our economy for years are going to have to pay. So I'd just like to show a little 3-minute clip from our film, Fractured Land here. This is based on a trip that we took up to this was Fort Nelson, Echo-Dene territory in the Horn River Basin last summer with Caleb and his family.
Hunting in the culture that I grew up in was family oriented. My grandfathers and many of my uncles and aunties are amazing hunters. It permeates our culture. We are a harvesting people as I learned it. What it is can't be distilled easily. It's like church and prayer and journey and economy and sovereign obligation and joyous pastime and communion with your ancestors and a worldview that's under attack. Pulling the trigger takes a split second. But all of this, which also has to be done to show respect to the animal, this is equally, if not more important, and it takes way longer. It requires way more skill.
Put it over there beside the big tree.
See the parts that Grandma did, they're real clean. And the parts that I did, they're still fat and stuff. She's 83 years old, put me to shame. 69.
69.
Your biggest was 83?
82.
82.
Long way to go.
I'll keep looking.
Yeah. I like caribou meat, but since the chemical and stuff, just an idea, I don't like that meat anymore. I just don't crave for it anymore.
Right before we left, we were using this infrared camera to try and figure out the stuff that you can't see with the eye. We're showing Grandpa. This is the plant up the road. That's not a fire. That's gas and heat escaping that you can't see with the naked eye. How do you check it out? He said that it gives him hope and it gives him peace as he faces his death, knowing that his legacy and our people are in good hands. And there's no greater honor or responsibility for a young man than to hear that from your father, your grandfather. My grandpa said it for me.
So that's the human face of LNG. Every time you hear those initials, think of these people. Think of the toxic injection site right at the mouth of Caleb's grandfather's trapline that he's maintained for 80 years since he was 9 years old. And the fact that he can't eat his traditional foods anymore. I'm just going to, I've got about probably 4 minutes left here. I'm going to buzz through 2. Okay. I think there's only maybe one thing here that hasn't been covered by other presenters in terms of these impacts. So I would like to just, it's at the start here. So David Hughes is the former top geologist for the federal government, the Geological Survey of Canada. He ran the federal government's National Shale Gas Potential Review. He's now retired and thankfully is independently researching, doing the best research, not just here in Canada, but even in the United States. He's advising the European Commission, major global banks on shale gas policies. And he has studied the actual data based on the first 5 or 10 years of this experiment, wellhead production data, and has painted a very different picture geologically than what we're being told about this industry. And he says that in order to fill those multiple pipelines and the 5 plants that this government is committed to build by 2021, that we would need 50,000 new fracked wells in BC. One of the reasons, and that's about twice, a little more than twice as many, or a little less than twice as many as we've had in the entire 60-year history of this industry. One of the reasons, so this is what it looks like in Texas right now. This is Caleb's territory, the Horn River, Liz's territory. Why are we going to need all these wells? We make about 4 billion cubic feet a day of gas today. We use about half of that and export the rest to Alberta and the US. The National Energy Board has already licensed 14 billion cubic feet a day of gas. So that's 3.5 times as much as we produce today in BC. Here's some of the licenses that they've given out. Almost all this new gas today is coming from fracking. The conventional stuff is gone pretty much. This is our production here in Canada. If it wasn't for BC, we would already be plummeting here in Canada. We're propping up the national, and we're just flatlined. And there's what it takes to get up to 14 billion. That's the ramping up that's going to be required. The other thing is, these wells don't behave like conventional gas wells. They drop off in production very quickly. They have the average 3-year decline rate. That means how much the gas production volume has decreased in 3-year time from one of these wells is 69%. In the States, of the top big 5 plays, it's 84%. That means you have to keep fracking more and more holes just to keep up with production, let alone expand. We will have to double the entire gas production in this country on the shoulders of BC, on the shoulders of people in Caleb's territory, where my family lives as well in the Peace Valley, and lost our ranch for the first big dam up there. So this is going to be very real, and we're going to carry this burden if we're serious about this. Some of these other issues we've already talked about. The water thing is huge, and I'm just going to leave, I think, off on an animation here. So with that 5 times as much fracking is 5 times as much water use, roughly speaking. Sure, they made a few improvements here and there, but it's still they're a pig on water, this industry, and all sorts of known carcinogens that go into that water. Just last year, we used 10.8 billion liters of fresh water pulled out of the northern boreal muskeg in rivers and lakes and streams. So imagine that going up to 50 billion a year in perpetuity. This government just said today, last time I heard Rich Coleman, he said it was going to be 85 years. We have enough, we're going to run this industry for. Today it went up to 150. 150 years. Now that's lunacy. The geology is not there. We've got about, Mr. Hughes says we could do this volume for 7 years and we'd run out of gas. So there's a huge disconnect. There's a lot of snake oil being sold here to investors around the world. But you know, if we take them at their word to some degree, that's what it's going to look like. It's going to be the water, the climate issues. We're going to double or triple our carbon footprint in this province from this industry. And this is water, the proliferation of water use in Liz and Caleb's territory, the Horn River Basin, Treaty, Fort Nelson territory. And you can see how it just exploded in the last couple of years. This is in 2011, getting into 2012 now. Now just take that and just multiply it exponentially into as far into the foreseeable future as you can imagine. And that's just a glimpse of what making this industry real looks like in British Columbia and for the whole planet. So I think I'll leave it off there. And our film will be coming out, we'll be finished in the fall, and stay tuned to us on Facebook, Fractured Land, for when we're going to have an opportunity to see it, because we will be touring it and screening as many places as we can across Canada and around the world, and we'd love to share that with you. Thank you.
Now we have Susan Spratt, who is the former area director for CAW, Unifor, which is the largest private union in Canada. So welcome.
I actually like being retired. Now the president of the retiree chapter, so I can actually say what I think more firmly. First of all, I'd like to thank very much the organizers and Council of Canadian and the Wilderness Committee for organizing this event. I would like to say that it's a privilege speaking on unceded Coast Salish territory, and it's an honor to be on this panel. I'm going to talk about green jobs in front of David Suzuki. Okay. So we're all suffering from you, David. But I want to say this. I want you to think back, because I think everything has a political root to why we are where we are today. And think back to 1988. We were promised in 1988 a free trade deal that would give us hundreds of thousands of jobs. And every trade deal since talks about hundreds of thousands of jobs. And we can all see where that went. We lost, actually, exponentially, hundreds of thousands of jobs with major closures across Canada, particularly in manufacturing and in other areas, which meant people started to scramble. And literally, when that happens to working class people and people that are looking for work, young people, and they get offered things, and they get offered jobs in gas and oil and fracking, We actually represent the workers in Fort McMurray. About 40% of the workers in Fort McMurray are First Nations. We also represent the workers at Kinder Morgan in Burnaby. And we also represent workers in Kitimat. And what do they all have in common? But I say this proudly after much debate. Those locals passed a resolution against bitumen pipelines and against fracking. I think they also did it because in their communities, they've collaborated with First Nations for decades. They've talked about the struggle of jobs for each community, and it's made them stronger. But here we are now, and I just want to say a couple of things. There was an article in the Vancouver Sun which reported that oil and gas lobbyists are more successful than any other industry in getting time with politicians in rich BC. And Damien just showed that. And we need to talk, as we have been over the last long period of time, but particularly since fracking has come up more, is you need water to frack. And in communities already facing water stress, and there are communities that suffer from water stress, they completely ran out of water. They had no water at all. All their water had to be trucked in. The International Energy Agency calculates that fracking will now produce 14% of the global gas supply. So let's imagine the following. I know you all put up your hands and said that you understand fracking, but I just want to remind you of a couple of things. The drill bores go to 1.5 to 3 kilometers deep. You cap it with cement and steel, and then you flush millions of liters of frack fluid, water, sand, and chemicals to make hairline cracks in the rock. And then the sand, with all the crap in it, keep the cracks open. This fluid is pumped back up for several days, and 40 to 70% of the fluid stays behind. And then you repeat up to 10 times. For gas, LNG, you cap it with a pipeline and it's in place. So people in Kitimat that say LNG is good because all they see is the end product. They don't see the fracked part of it because you get the pipeline and then you take it to the terminal. Fracking isn't only used on shale formations, and I don't trust any government in Canada not to consider that it can also crack methane on coal deposits. Each well uses 9 to 29 million liters of water over its lifetime. And I don't have time to discuss the chemical impact on land and watersheds because I think many other people have talked about that. But I think you get the idea. I've been asked to talk about green jobs, ones where workers and communities are not subjected to toluene and xylene, which causes and has caused central nervous system damage, among a host of other horrible ill effects. So we have a big job to communicate with workers, especially young workers, desperate for good paying jobs. That's what pipelines and fracked LNGs are being used as. The carrot being held up to workers and to many First Nation communities is that's the answer by industry and government to create prosperity. So we at Unifor, as I've said, we said what we have about bitumen and fracking. We talk about alternatives which create green jobs, such as clean energy, solar, expanded transit, green affordable housing, pipelines for water for all communities in Canada. That would be amazing. From the high north to the south. And how about a public transportation that operates 24/7 on Highway 16? But a resolution passed by a convention or a national executive board is not enough. What must we do? I was asked to make some suggestions, so I will. We must build, between the labor movement, a stronger collaboration with First Nations. It's not good enough to sign a document and have everybody there signing it and then never talk after that. It's not just to be on panels or rallies, although that's important, but it's to do the day-to-day collaboration of work and listen. I mean listen, not speechify, not talk down, but to listen. When certain chiefs agree, as has already been said, to fracking on their territories, or when some unions agree they support fracking, and they have, we need to talk to them. You never win people over by isolating and denouncing them. You just don't. But you have to force that communication. You have to force that kind of discussion, or it will never happen. We have to build a bigger and more diverse coalition in British Columbia of young people, of First Nations, of everybody, from every class and every structure that we know. It has to be bigger and more diverse. I think that we need to build a war chest for First Nations people and for settlers who are prepared to defend the land in courts or go to jail to stop what this government and the federal government wants to do to this nation, and in particular the Musqueam. And we must ensure that every community and all workers have real jobs. And we know there's countries, we could have a different forum on what's been done on green jobs in Norway, in Europe, in many other countries, and share that information, talk about what real green jobs are, and that they are economically viable, and that they do put a good paycheck in people's pocket, and that they don't affect climate change, and that they are good and will be good for not me, for my grandchildren, for my great-grandchildren, and for the generations after that, because we all know that there's no point having a job on a dead planet, and there's no point having a job that you can't leave to future generations to be able to have water, fish, animals, and clean and safe communities for all of us. So think about it. If you are a union member, stand up, be counted, challenge. Tell people that you are opposed to fracking, that you are opposed to pipelines, and why. And if you don't know, then share the info. If they don't know, then share more information with them. Because it's only going to be that we have rooms like this all the time across British Columbia that we're going to stop Christy Clark, Harper, but more importantly, we're going to stop these damn corporations thinking they can come in here and rape and pillage everything that we know and love. Thank you.
Okay, so final speaker of the night is Grand Chief Stewart Phillip. He's the president of the Union of BC Indian Chiefs.
Roy Haskell help. EPC Naxil and Shia Squeeze ASU. I want to begin by acknowledging the Coast Salish peoples, namely the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh. And I would also like to thank the organizers, the Council of Canadians for a kind invitation and bringing us all together to have this important conversation. I've heard it said in the past that there's a certain advantage to being the final speaker. You simply thank everybody for coming and ask the last person to turn the lights off. But I guess the reason I came down tonight is very much what the last speaker had to say. I've been blessed with 6 adult children, and they in turn have blessed Joe and myself with 14 incredibly beautiful grandchildren. And that's what gets me out of bed in the morning, and that's what energizes me to drive to all points of the compass and all throughout the province of British Columbia. I've been involved in the issues of our people for the last 40 years. And I've seen an enormous amount of change and transformation in the last 4 decades. I've seen incredible change, yet at the same time I've seen other things get worse. And of course, I'm speaking of the great peril that Mother Earth finds herself in at this point in human history. And I very much believe that as a lot of scientists and environmentalists and indigenous spiritual leaders have said for a very long time now, that we are indeed at a tipping point. And we heard an hour or so ago the Premier get up, and of course the party line of the BC Liberals is it's a generational opportunity. LNG is a generational opportunity. And I don't believe that for a moment. I believe what we're presented with is the most incredible challenge of our generation, to stand up, to mobilize, to organize, to defend the natural values that we all treasure and have taken for granted for a very, very long time. We've all been blessed with the opportunity to live in one of the most beautiful spots on the planet. And we've taken our children out into the wilderness and out into the bush, and we've enjoyed that natural beauty. And I think to our own detriment, we just assume that that's going to be there forever. And with what we've witnessed here tonight and what we've heard and what we're learning, the only way that our grandchildren will enjoy the same legacy that was left to us is if we do what the last speaker talked about. We absolutely have to stand up, be counted, organize, mobilize, and fill rooms like this over and over and over again, so that we are able to popularize what's happening. And I think by and large, society has been completely taken in by the corporate, as we know, as BS, the propaganda, the marketing, the bombardment of advertisements we hear 24/7. And we heard the Premier talking about it being, clean energy, clean industry. And we know that is absolutely not the truth. I think we need to be absolutely visible. We have to be heard, we have to be loud, we have to be proud, we have to be out in the streets. And I know it's a challenge to give up your time. I was at a funeral of a very young person in Osoyoos just a few days ago. And for those of you that don't know, Chief Clarence Louis has been the chief there for 20, 30 years. And he talked about the responsibilities of leadership. And he talked about what he described as leadership time. And he said leadership time is not 9 to 5, it's not 5 days a week. Leadership time is when you contribute your own personal time to a cause, whatever that cause may be. And in this case, it's being able to educate the general public about the absolute horror story of LNG. Coming here tonight and seeing some of those presentations, it never occurred to me that it is far, far worse than Enbridge and Kinder Morgan. I think that we have been lulled into thinking if we win those battles, that we'll have won the war. But I would suggest, based on what we witnessed, that the LNG is the real enemy in everything that it represents. The Union of BC Indian Chiefs is mandated by resolution when our chiefs come together in assembly. And as of late, our leaders, and we represent over half of the First Nations in the province, our organization is growing in proportion to the threats to the homelands of our constituent communities and the failure on the part of the Government of Canada to be able to do anything other than hollow rhetoric and promises. We've been mandated to organize and to look toward a rally, a march. We were looking at June the 7th. There's some discussion that should be pushed over to the 9th. For those of you that have been following these issues, there's been 3 forums throughout the province on LNG. The last one was in Fort Nelson a few weeks ago. And I had the honor and the opportunity to be there. And I can tell you it was life-changing for me, and it was heartbreaking. Because like yourselves, I've heard about the devastation to the homelands of Treaty 8. But we had the opportunity to go up in a chopper and go over the basins. And it took a few hours, and it was absolutely heartbreaking. There's no other way to describe it, to actually see it, to see how devastating it is to the landscape and how it's completely fractured the land. And I'm told at nighttime, the lights of the gas plants and the wells, it looks like the Lower Mainland. And when you see it like that, it's so hard to talk about. I desperately, all that time we're up in the air, I look for a moose or a deer or some sign of wildlife, and I didn't see anything. So it's the northeast. The economy of this province is being built on the destruction of the northeast. And the pipelines that are being contemplated by LNG will further destroy the north. And we have a social responsibility as human beings, as grandparents and parents, to lend our support to Treaty 8, to all of the people in the north that are fighting so valiantly to push back this agenda. And I think that we're making progress. I absolutely know that to be the case. We had the dubious opportunity, I suppose, to meet with the new Minister of Natural Resources earlier today, this afternoon. We met in the very same room that we met former Minister Joe Oliver. And I described that meeting as absolutely bizarre when that happened about a year ago. And he just simply repeated speaking points. There was no dialogue, there was no serious discussion of the issues at hand. And today we sat across from Minister Rickford and we heard the same rhetoric, the same speaking points, the same arrogance, the same condescending manner that we should wake up, we should smarten up and know and understand that the Government of Canada knows best and that we should go along with this agenda. And it was a very tense, adversarial meeting that we had today. So there's absolutely no way that they're even going to look at the IFERD report and the 30-odd recommendations in that report, which would require substantive investments to bring about those recommended interventions. They're not about to do that. They're looking for a shortcut to be able to get through the constitutional and legal minefield of the rights of the First Nations in this province. And I had the sense that they're under tremendous pressure because I believe that both Canada and British Columbia are falling behind with respect to the international market situation and, Premier Clark's bogus notions of prosperity vis-a-vis LNG, I think was a gimmick. It was an election gimmick, and it was bogus from day one. And I think that the news we heard today with respect to the Russian-Chinese arrangement with natural gas exports is going to present a very embarrassing challenge for the Premier to be able to try and assure the markets and potential investors that BC somehow is still in this race, because I don't believe that is the case, but nonetheless, we know that we'll continue to fight these battles until such time as we have governments in place with a national and provincial vision that speaks to the interests of the people who have made their homes in this beautiful province, who have invested generations of their families' lives in building a livelihood in tourism and everything that speaks to the natural values and the beauty of this province. And up till now, with these governments, we've been catering to outside interests, corporate interests, and the interests of the genuine British Columbians are being ignored and sacrificed. So we have to mobilize. This has to become a popular struggle. And I just want to close off by thanking each and every one of you for coming out tonight and so generously sharing of your time and hearing from our learned panel here. I just want to also end by acknowledging the Treaty 8 chiefs who have demonstrated incredible leadership over the last decade or two with respect to this fight against oil and gas, against Site C. And, without question, I've fallen in love with Treaty 8 territory, with the elders in Treaty 8. And when you get to that point of falling in love, you will be there at their side when the rubber hits the road. So again, I thank everyone for coming out. Wyatt, Linda.
Thank you, Grand Chief Philip. So that is the end of the official speeches, but we actually have a few other things we're going to do before this is over. I want to start off by thanking the speakers, again, for taking their time, for sharing their passion and their knowledge today with us. Also wanted to say that we're going to ask a question of the speakers that Owen is going to do in a second. But if folks are trickling out, I just wanted to say that there is a rally on Friday that Rising Tide is organizing, and it's at noon. And so if some of you are worked up from what you've heard today, you can probably grab a flyer on your way out, because that's going to be happening at the convention center or on its way to it.
Okay, I just want to say a few words to close out the event and cover a very important question. During my time here in Canada, I've looked towards our politics. I'm going to call them political representatives and not leaders, and I've looked for leadership, and I feel that they have failed us on that front. But luckily enough, my job has brought me in contact with people like Chief Ronan Wilson, Grand Chief Stewart Phillip, Tribal Chief Liz Logan, Chief Ian Campbell, and so on. And I believe in these nations we're being shown genuine leadership, genuine diplomacy. And I want to thank you for doing that and giving us that lesson, because we needed that in the last number of years. So, I'm to cover next steps. I wanted to reach into why it is you came here, what drove you here tonight. For me, what drove me is the love I have for my nieces and nephews, and the will I have to look into their eyes and say, I did the best I could to make sure that you had a livable climate. And I want you to look at what drove you here tonight and make a commitment to stand together with everybody in this room to fight the LNG proposals, the LNG windfall that we're told is good for us, as far as we have to go to the bitter end. The question I have for the panel, and this is really important for everyone here, is how can we, now that we've come here, now that we've joined in community around this issue, how can we help your cause? What can the people here do to help you succeed in what you're trying to do? And I hope that everybody here commits themselves to fighting this fight. I don't know if do you have a mic?
Yeah. So your mics work, so you can just fight over it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have, I guess the one thing that I would ask is that you speak to your friends and spread the word and help support us in our fight against this projects and what it's doing to our territories. But I want to also bring to your attention that I have been out on a speaking tour. The Council of the Haida Nation invited me out to their nation several months ago to do a presentation because they heard me speak at another conference, and so I did that. And now they are paying for my way to go out on a Northwest BC tour, and so I'm starting that on Sunday actually. So I'm going to Smithers, Terrace, Hazelton, Morristown, Kitimat, Prince Rupert, I can't think, there's a few other places. So it's going to go from Sunday until Friday. So if you know any relatives, friends up in that area, get them to come out, and I get more time there. I actually get 2 hours in each of these communities, so I'm going to get into a lot more detail than I did tonight. So just spread the word. Thanks.
So, from my perspective as my Cedar Sky, one of the things that we're asking everybody to do is to write to your politicians, call them up, tell them what you think, let them know that you don't support this industry, let them know that you don't support these projects. It's really important that they hear from you. It doesn't matter whether you voted or not, It doesn't matter whether you're, you know, you agree with their policies or not. They just need to hear from you. And it needs to happen in a respectful manner as well. As soon as you are not respectful, or as soon as you go into the emotional debates, then they just disregard you, right? So it needs to be rational, logical, clear, concise. It can just be a couple of lines even, but you need to let them know they need to hear from you. And that is one of the most important things that you can do.
I would just like to again thank you for all being here, and just ask that you stand with all of our relatives, especially up in Treaty 8, who are really dealing with this issue right now. Stand with them and support, as well as all the other territories that are dealing with the proposed developments, and spread the word and stand together and take action.
So two things. I think it is really important to tell politicians that you're opposed, but I think it's way more effective if you do it in writing in a letter. I know that sounds old-fashioned because everybody has emails and iPods and iPads and all the rest of it, but the more paper that piles up, somebody has to clear that, get it all ready. It has much more impact. But number two is, I think what I tried to get across is that we have to work together so that when you in your territory are having an open meeting, that we know, so people can come from other communities and vice versa, because the dialogue is absolutely critical. I believe in, we need to form groups that meet more regularly and figure out what we can do to get feet on the ground on these issues.
I hate problems. I like solutions. So we started this great wing of Skeena Watershed Conservation Coalition called Skeena Energy Solutions. So people come in and they propose these big LNG problems. So we said, what does it actually look like to propose solutions instead of oppose stupidity? So, so we launched it, and what we discovered is not only do the solutions exist, but they can be implemented right now for a fraction of the cost of LNG. Plastic to oil machines are doing it in Whitehorse. It costs $200,000. You can recycle non-recyclable plastics like styrofoam and plastic bags, and you bring it down to its original components, which is oil and gas. And you could fuel public transit on Highway 16 and stop having girls and women being murdered and missing out there, for example. You could have taken the 14,000 logging truckloads of wood that were burnt to build the Northwest Transmission Line, and you could have put them into wood gasifiers, which would have supplied all the electricity and all the heat for the entire Northwest region for about 300 years. That's a solution. So we can work on solutions, and so I'm going to be kind of the troublemaker. Well, I'm always a troublemaker, but I would like to propose that you send us money, because that's what we need to implement these solutions. And every organization in here who's working on this, almost every organization is doing this off the side of their desks. They're not getting funded to do LNG. It happened so fast and so quick. Nobody wrote grant proposals or that stuff. I know I'm doing it off the side of my desk. And we're trying to lock up the sacred headwaters. We're trying to build a sustainable and robust economy in Northwest BC, and we have everything we need to do that, and LNG threatens our ability. So every organization in here, if you have $5, if you have $10, they deserve that support, because that's how we keep going. So I know that I mean, in my family, you'd rather cut off your arm than ask people for money, but it's the reality.
Well, I'm going to echo my good friend Shannon's comments about the money. And for me, it's I'm in the information business, and at the Common Sense Canadian, we're really delving into this LNG thing. We're about to run a little fundraising campaign for really in-depth. We've already, I think we published something like 90 stories on and opinion columns and videos on the LNG issue over the last year and a half or so that we've been covering. I think we were fairly early on to it. And but we really want to double down on that. It's just apparent to me from reading the mainstream media every day that there's such a shallow understanding of the economics, the ecological issues, the climate issues, all the stuff that we talked about here tonight, that we really want to, through our growing alternate media channels, to put good information in the hands of people like yourselves that you can share with your neighbors and include in your letters to your politicians. And so that's really our focus, and so we will be looking for support, and if you can share your financial support, share it with your friends and coworkers and family members, etc., so we can get the word out on that. My good friend and co-founder, Rafe Mayer, just thankfully came out of the hospital after about 5 months, and his first thing he did getting out of his deathbed was he wrote a story about Howe Sound, which he overlooks from his home in Lions Bay, and the wood-fired LNG plant, and the gravel mine, and the waste-to-energy plant, and the massive housing, and all the things that are coming down the pipeline, but particularly this LNG thing. I think we're totally on the same page that this is really the big issue confronting, and it's sort of package of issues that dovetail into that we talked about tonight. So we could really use your support to do more good research and writing and videos to get this message out to the public and decision makers. And so watch for that. We're all over Facebook and the web. You can find us at commonsensecanadian.ca. Thanks.
Last words of the night. There is no going back. He's right. You're right. We cannot leave this room and not fight this issue. I want you to try and create this conversation again. This event has been really successful because you came to this, but we need to have more of them. Grand Chief Stewart Philip is right. We have to have more of these conversations. Wilderness Committee commits to coming to those, speaking to them, helping you create them, but we need you to do that. If you need to organize your community, there are groups here, the Lead Nows, the Organizing for Changes. They're here and they will help you organize your community to be more active. If you feel like you need help, do it. Don't look for anything else. The time is now, but thank you for coming tonight. Have a lovely night.